Hi, I'm Terry Leverett, president of Prepare the Way. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Her name is Glenna Callen. She has expertise in her field. She comes to this with a master's in home economics and nutrition. Thank you.
My background, yes, was home ec, specialty foods and nutrition. And I've always been interested in working with food. But when you're looking at food storage, one of my frustrations was a lot of the plans just don't make sense for regular families. So I started looking at it like, what is sustainable? You know, what could you feed your family long term? Especially for so many people in the population that don't have a lot of finances to sow into that. If you're feeding a growing family right now and you're also thinking long term feeding that growing family, it's a different thought process. And another thing we've become aware of is now there are just two of us at home. And the way we eat is drastically different than the way we ate when our sons were home growing. And you know, teenage boys, it's anything you can stuff in their mouths. So we've readjusted, and even just thinking about how quickly we burn through food now compared to how quickly when we have company. So all of those factors, and when you're looking on the web, you see, you know, the complete freeze-dried, you know, top of the line is a choice. You can go freeze-dried, dehydrated choices. You can go all bulk food choices. You can ignore it all and hope it goes away. But my goal is to hopefully practically help you think through some of these things, and so that for your family, your situation, that you can make wise choices. And then ultimately, you know, my basic opening is this. Let's say you are one of the wise people who has stocked up some sort of food supply. What are you going to do with it? You know, so many of us will buy it with good intentions, and then we don't use it. Either we don't want to open that can of butter powder or whatever and have to use it up, or we just always think we're going to get to it, we're going to get to it. And we're all alike. So hopefully I'll help you break through some of those barriers. And please do jot down questions as we come to it, because there's always this thing with a speaker of not knowing exactly what information you're needing the most. And some things I may go too quickly, some things I may totally space. So please write those down, and in a question answer time we will get to that. Okay, so like I said, we're going to pretend that you are the wise one. You've stocked up on something, some food supply somewhere, hopefully this one. Let's look at what you're going to do with that. Now, if you have not, I want you to get a picture, and I'm just so grateful that Terry has had all this brought in, because if you're looking at a 1-year food supply for one person, it looks something like that. Now, if you went with a company that's all freeze-dried, dehydrated, really bulk size is going to be about the same. Space storage requirements. Buckets require you know, a different configuration of storage space than the cans. Cans you can slide under a bed or stack in the top of a closet. But nonetheless, proportionally, it's about that much space. And you may say, okay, so who comes up with all that? In one of my beginning presentations, I traced it all back to, it was called the Mormon Four back in the 60s. There was a lady who developed all of that, and a lot of the food plans now really are based on some basic recommendations. And I'm going to review those with you before I go through that, what we've got over there. So like grains, and again, if it's freeze-dried, dehydrated, prepackaged meals, they still kind of look at this. But grains generally around 300 pounds per person per year. A bucket's about 60 pounds. It's about 5 buckets. Beans and legumes, 60 to 90 pounds per person per year. Milk and dairy, 60 to 75 pounds. Fats and oils, 20 to 35 pounds. Sweeteners, around 60 pounds, which is about 1 bucket. And then fruits and vegetables, that varies. We recommended 4 to 8 cans of some sort of fruit, 10 to 15 of vegetables. And then, of course, there are other basics. Now, the original Mormon Four, and I have a slide in my other presentation, but it was milk, powder, sweetener, wheat, and salt. So if you go back to the original person who put it together, that wheat was turned into everything from the gluten made into the protein, you know, the meat substitute, to gluten candy, to all sorts of things made with wheat. And then, of course, we have some powdered milk, and we have some sweetener, and we have some salt. But you think about how most of us live right now and how difficult that would be. And you always think, well, if I'm in an emergency, I'll eat anything. Well, you know, our digestive systems aren't set up for that. And when you're in an emergency is the last time you want to try a whole lot of something brand new. So keep all that in mind. We're looking for variety. We're looking for things your body is used to digesting. And you will find out when I make recommendations, I tend to lean toward basic foods and filling a pantry with basic food products that have lots of application. I'm not big on the pre-mixed meals. They're great for emergencies, for going, for, you know, if you're evacuating a hurricane, whatever, that kind of thing, absolutely. But for long-term family use, I'm much more a proponent of the bulk foods. Okay, so let's just take a look at what this could look like. We have the hard white wheat, and I'm not going to go through each box. I'm just going to highlight some of that. There is, I'm seeing 3 buckets right here, 45 pounds each. Okay, there's the hard white and the hard red wheat. And I actually have samples on the table of each. The white wheat, if you've not used the 2 in whole wheat, white wheat's milder. It makes a wonderful bread. And if you're trying to get your family to transition, the white wheat is a little less strong. It's my favorite. I really, really like using it. But wheat's versatile. And again, we have the issues now. We talk about the gluten intolerance is a huge thing. And that's real. And so many of the plans focus on wheat. The reason they do that is because it's so versatile, and it stores so long, and it's accessible. Okay, so if you are dealing with gluten intolerance, of course you can't tolerate the wheat, so you'll need to make some adjustments. Keep that in mind also. So we have the wheat berries, which are whole grain. All right, so think through that. Wheat berries, which means I'm going to have to grind them probably. You can cook them whole. It takes a long time to cook. You can crack them. And I have, I'll talk about bulgur in a little bit. That's one of my very favorite wheat products. But some sort of a grinder. And just, how many of you have hand grinders? Do you have a hand grinder? Have you used it? Oh my goodness. Let me tell you. We got the really good one, the Country Living Grain Mill. And they have to be permanently attached. And ours is on a heavy, heavy wooden table. And that thing takes effort. So you need a bunch of teenage boys, seriously, or you need to power it if you're going to do any kind of grain. The other difficulty with those is the fineness of the grain. I had an email from a lady who said, my loaf of bread's like a brick. What did I do wrong? And I can just almost guarantee that's what it was. The grain was so coarse that it makes a heavier loaf of bread. So the options are to keep tightening it down and grinding it again and getting it finer and finer. The other thing is pull out one of these items that hardly anybody uses anymore or has, is a sifter. Yeah, and then you get the coarser grain and you cook it for cereal, and then you use the fine grain for your breads. So just things like that. We don't cook like this anymore. It's a whole different learning thing. And then what? Rod and I cheated. We put solar panels on, so we're going to keep using our electric grain mill. Yeah. All right, so we have the wheat. We have another item you will see is rice. Almost always in long-term storage, it's white rice. And you understand that that's because the brown rice does not store as well. It's still, the entire kernel is intact, which means it gets rancid. It's much better for you. So your option on this might be get your white rice to store and then have brown rice that you're using routinely that you can keep cool and you can rotate. Okay? Usually if it's brown rice, you'll see it in cans, or if you have a bucket of it and can keep it cool, keep it refrigerated, break it down, freeze some of it, do something with it to keep it fresh. Oatmeal. In this particular one's quick oats. Often you will have the regular rolled oats. You can also get oat groats, which are the whole oat Then steel cut, and I have samples of those up here. Steel cut are like chunks of oat, and then the rolled oats, and then the quick oats. So very versatile product. Oatmeal is one of our favorite storage items. All of those are some of those grains. See, we've got variety now. We're not just focusing on the wheat. Barley is another one. The pearled barley is typically what you will find. Barley's kind of sweet. It's a nice thing for soups. It has quite a bit of versatility too. As I'm just glancing through here, of course, we have the beans, pinto beans, because they're one of the most versatile. And then some of the other favorite beans, and they're in the smaller containers, would be like black beans. You can do, lentils. There are tons of different kinds of beans. And beans are something, by the way, another thing that I'm really strong on is growing as much as you can. But beans are something you can grow. And again, with all these things, my thing is look for things that are accessible locally. In the Midwest, we can access wheat. We can access beans. We can access the oats. We can access corn. Some of those things that are easily accessible. I want to contrast that with the quinoa, which is one of the common things you've probably been hearing a lot about in just a bit too. I have a sample of that. Okay, some of the others back on my list there. We have Sweetener. Well, before I get to the Sweetener, on the corner here we have Pancake mix. We went to an emergency, it's state of Missouri emergency personnel gave a conference, and one of the guys was talking about one of the most practical tips he had was pancake mix. Water only pancake mix. The reason being, you can cook pancakes on anything. Children love pancakes. You can make sandwiches out of pancakes. You know, smear peanut butter on them. Don't think in terms of breakfast and pancakes. Very, very versatile. And the stuff keeps a long time. So that's a nice convenience food to have. Then sweeteners, of course, sugar keeps forever. Honey keeps forever. It's a great thing to store. Some of the smaller items there are like the instant milk. I'm going to have samples of that kind of thing. There's the cheddar cheese powder. There's also a freeze-dried cheese. And if you haven't seen the difference between the two, the dehydrated cheddar cheese powder is like what you would find in the macaroni and cheese boxes. It's that kind of thing. Freeze-dried cheese is almost like the fresh product. It's fabulous. Now, it's much more pricey, but that's why you are really getting a realistic product there. And while I'm talking about this too, a couple more things I want to add in case you have not heard the basic type introduction conference or topic. Dehydrated and freeze-dried. Freeze-dried products are one of those things that are newer in the last 10 years or so. They have just become so excellent. Many of the products that all we had choices for before were the dehydrated, that they just didn't do a very good job with them. Some foods are better dehydrated. Many of the fruits and vegetables are better freeze-dried. And it just opened up a whole lot of new options. So when you think of things like freeze-dried strawberries, those are a treat. Those freeze-dried fruits are really, really excellent. So keep that in mind also. Another wonderful thing I want to draw your attention to. When you're working with buckets, these basic lids always come on them. But my recommendation, and I think anybody who's worked with buckets would be also invest in some gamma lids. And how that works is like when you open your bucket of wheat, you pop this on the outer rim, you take off that lid, pop that on, and then this is a reclosable lid. And then when you need more wheat, you just open the bucket, pour it in that one, and you use from this one bucket. And then you can get these in all colors. You can color code so that maybe rice is another color or whatever. Wonderful, wonderful product. Pardon? Yes, oh yes, these are on the website, on the Prepare the Way website. All right, now on the other side over here, you're going to see the 3-month recommended supply. Notice the difference, cans versus buckets. And you know, when I think of food storage, I always think more in that type of thing because, again, the versatility. And when you're talking 1 year, one person, well, for a family of 4, you know, that's 3 months. That's really not very long. The problem when you start reducing is the versatility and the variety. You end up just fewer products. It just is a difficult transition to make. But let's say you are a single, or you are someone with an apartment and you're moving quickly and you just don't have space. Now again, probably you're going to be a person who would want the freeze-dried pouches or freeze-dried cans of the mixtures, like beef stroganoff type thing. That would work well for you. But if you're also wanting some basic foods, this is more of a configuration that you would have. We have the number 10 cans rather than the buckets, partly because of space. But it would look about like that. The reason some of them are in much smaller, it's always more economical to go buckets. It just is. Then the next thing would be the number 10 cans. And the reason some of these are in smaller ones is just because, like baking powder, if you're a single, you would not use, a number 10 can of baking powder in a lifetime. It would go bad. So some of those things are packaged smaller just because of that. Any of the dairy products like this, the butter powders, milk powders, those have a shorter shelf life. And a lot of that depends on how you store it. You'll read, and companies will say, our products store up to 30 years. Notice that up to, because it depends on your situation. If you have a cool, dry basement, you'll get the full life out of them. If they're in a garage or where they're getting actually the extreme temperatures are worse than a stable high or low. But where they're getting a lot of extreme temperatures, it's going to shorten the shelf life. And particularly, you think about it in dairy products, that would be true. Now, again, wheat and white rice are durable. They will last and last and last. And we have put ours through the test. Actually, I'm using wheat now that we purchased in 1996 through 99. And it was stored, we had a farmhouse, no basement, so we stored it in an outbuilding. So high temperatures, low temperatures, all the extremes, until about 6 years ago, and now we have a great basement. But I opened that thinking there would be a problem. There has not been any problem whatsoever. Makes excellent bread. It goes through the stone grinder. It hasn't picked up moisture, no issues whatsoever. But again, that's wheat, okay? And that's one reason you always see it in the long-term food storage. All right, so let's think about some of the ways you can use these products and some more specifics about this. If you are not wanting long-term, you're wanting just to stock up on some things you got, and you're just traveling down the aisle at Sam's and pick up a 10-pound bag of Pinto Beans. Pretty economical, really. They're about 58 cents a pound, $5.80 or so for 10 pounds, and that price could have varied some by now, but still, a lot of food value there. But what are you going to do with them? Or you have your wheat, your big, you bought a 50-pound bag of whole wheat. What are you going to do with it? And that kind of thing. That's what I'm hoping to help you think through, some of the possibilities with the things that you've purchased. And in a later session, I've actually made some samples that we'll be trying some things that hopefully give you some good ideas and also include some recipes for you. Okay, I think before I start this, I want to draw your attention to some of the equipment that might be helpful. And when you're storing foods, it's kind of like in the earlier workshop. If you don't have the equipment to take care of what you got, it could be a problem. Same thing with food storage. The lids I mentioned were very important. The sifter is another important thing. Things like strainers, okay? Things like funnels. I mean, all these sorts of things that you normally it isn't a big deal. And then cast iron cookware. Yeah. And with cast iron cookware, the older Griswold and Wagner, I believe, were the ones that were made, I don't know, one of them they quit making in the 50s or 60s, and I don't know about the other one. But they're the older products, are really the best. And your goal is for it to be very, very smooth. And when you use these things all the time, this one is particularly used for eggs. And it takes no additional grease of any kind. After it's used, it's wiped out with grease. but you get a nice smooth finish on them. And people who value their cast iron take good care of it. The newer kinds, the Lodge is the brand you'd see if you're purchasing. They just don't have this heavy and fine, smooth surface. Again, they're usable and you got what you can. But if you happen upon any at an auction or a estate sale or any of the old cast iron, it is definitely worth cleaning up to use. Another thing, hand can opener. I mean, absolutely, because you've got all these cans, and they do have the resealable lids on them, the plastic lids, but you've got to get them open. Think non-electric for everything. And this is another thing, if any of you used to have these stainless steel thermos. Now this is a narrow top, which isn't ideal. The wide mouth would be better for this purpose. But a lot of these grains can be softened overnight. You can pour boiling water over oatmeal the night before and then have hot oatmeal that next morning. There are seasoning kinds. You can make your own homemade mixes. If you have some of the dehydrated things you get are really don't soften up as quickly as they say they will if you've tried those products. But the freeze-dried ones do. And you can pour boiling water over, let it sit, and have a non-electric meal. Lots of options with these non-electric things. Another thing that a lot of people don't have is heavy-duty stock pots. But when you're cooking with a lot of these basic things, again, different scenarios, but let's say you have a crowd of people. You're probably going with one-dish meals or soups, and you need big, heavy stock pots. Lots of versatility with this. When I do the food preservation workshop, you can use this for a boiling water bath canner also. So multiple uses, but get good, heavy ones. All right, let's do the table tour because I want to talk with you about some of the things you can do. I pulled up that bag of beans there, and I hope you've been thinking about things you could do with that. I'm going to run through a list since we aren't in a question-answer format, and I bet you guys can add to this. All right, basic ham and beans, right? Chili, and you could have pre-cooked beans for that. You could mash and season them for burritos. You could have baked beans. You can grind them for bean flour. You can sprout them. You can do beans and rice of all variations. And again, with beans and rice, you're getting the 3 parts grain, 1 part bean combination, which makes a complete protein. That's why often in third world countries too, you'll find in other parts of the world everywhere, you'll find combinations of grains and beans, and that's for the protein. Bean or the veggie burger type things, you can do those out of beans. You can add them to soups or salads. You can do like a black bean dip and corn salsa. I mean, that's like really good food. Hummus out of garbanzo beans. You can do refried beans served as a side dish with eggs. You can do like Ezekiel bread, which has the ground beans in it. This is something I'll have a sample for you later. But I did an Ezekiel mix just from my stored grains. And it included, and I don't, let's see, I have this on the recipe. I don't have it in front of me, so I'll try to do it from memory. But it was wheat berries, rye berries, millet, and 3 kinds of beans. And then I ground it, have Ezekiel flour, and then I made for you to try later Ezekiel muffins. And then you can do Ezekiel bread, Ezekiel pancakes. You can do a lot of things with the flour, but the advantage of adding things besides the wheat, you have the beans in it, is the more protein. And you can, white beans are something that, I don't know, the flavor I don't think is quite as good in the texture as the pintos or the black beans, but white beans are nice because you can grind them and make white bean flour to stir into gravies or thickeners for soups, and they have a bit more pleasing color. So you have more again, the more you store variety, the more versatility you have. Now, I'd like to also show you some of the options with products that you're going to hear about that you may not be familiar with. One thing is wheat. I mentioned wheat is so versatile. These are the wheat sprouts. I started these 2 days ago. They are not green yet. I haven't had them out in the window to green up. But just on my kitchen counter, just little jars, little cheap plastic lids. You can also use muslin and put it over the jar and put just a canning ring on it. You don't have to have this kind of lid. You don't need a fancy sprouter of any sort. But wheat sprouts, you can stir them in things, you can chop them, put them in bread, you can just do tons of things with wheat sprouts. You increase nutrition, you increase versatility and digestibility by sprouting them. This is a little sprouting mix I bought, paid a fortune for, and basically it's clover and radish. Those are the two primary things in it, and I thought that's interesting because with my cheap lentils, I can sprout them in 2 days. I can sprout almost anything I've got here, and I don't have to go with those pre-packaged mixes. Now, alfalfa sprouts are something you'll often see packaged, and that's probably about the only way you'll find them is the pre-packaged like that. And they just, you know, a tiny little bit of sprouts or seeds will make huge numbers of sprouts. But often you can sprout beans, you can sprout all sorts of things. And this was probably just, a tablespoon or two of seeds in both cases. And you can tell how they swell up and add them to salads, you know, all sorts of things you can do with those. Okay, some of the other bean things, I've mentioned how important I think it is to have several types. The pinto beans are very versatile. Black beans are totally different taste, texture. Then you have the white beans, the Great Northerns, and the navy beans. And I have samples up here of the navy beans. One thing you might find is that beans tend to get stale after 5 to 8 years, depending on how you define stale and depending on how you stored them. But things you can do with those stale beans, you can crack them and they'll cook more quickly. And if you've ever purchased like a dehydrated chili type mix, like I don't know, any of the Rainy Day or Mountain House or any of those, if you notice the beans are cracked, and that's to decrease the cooking time. So the same thing would be true if you have stored beans that need that. You could crack them. The other thing you can do with them, and this is what I did with my navy beans. I got a whole bucket of navy beans, and we just don't care for them. They just took a long time to soften up, and we just didn't care much for them. So I canned them. I seasoned them and pressure canned them. And they were much, much more palatable. And then I can stir them in soups, and I can use them more ways. And again, when you have a pressure canner or a pressure cooker, you can tenderize beans. So if that has been an issue with some storage foods, keep that in mind. Poor little forgotten lentils. Lentils cook quickly, they don't require soaking, they sprout immediately. They're great. And when I talk about cooking quickly, it depends on when you're using your products. If you're just in a situation where money is tight, you have plenty of time, you have plenty of water, you can cook something all day. But if you are in an emergency situation and you're needing to ramp up on all of that, you want things that cook quickly. And lentils are a great idea for that. Then have you seen the 10 bean soup mixes, that kind of thing? And that's another option, and I have, again, a sample of that. The one down thing with that, for me, I think, is just the texture variant with it. You have some things that cook quickly and mush up, and some things that don't. The advantage with it, though, is that you get lots of the varied nutrition. Every bean has its strengths. So you can purchase those, again, in little 1-pound bags, or you can purchase them like in a number 10 can. One thing you see a lot, too, is it's called Hearty Soup Mix. In fact, there's one company that their products, I'm trying to think, 2 of the main ones they sell are, for a 1-year supply, are Millet and a Hearty Soup Mix. And the Hearty Soup Mix is basically split pea, lentil, rice, and there's a little alphabet type macaroni in it. And it's something that you would stir into soups. It's a great thing to have on hand for stirring in. I don't know that I would count on it for my only thing. I think you need more variety. And then I have garbanzo beans. You're familiar with those. Then we go to our grains. I mentioned the white wheat. There's also the red wheat. Again, the hard wheats are typically what are available and what you would store. I also mentioned that one of my favorite products is bulgur. If you've had tabbouleh, that's probably the thing you're most familiar with. The reason I like bulgur and what it is, and it's spelled all sorts of different ways. Sometimes it's B-U-L-G-U-R, sometimes B-U-L-G-A-R, sometimes there's an H in there. It's all the same thing. But it is a cracked, steamed, dried wheat. So it becomes a convenience food. So you can make your own, and you can buy it either way. But I have done both. It's kind of a pain to make, so since it's cracked, it's considered not a long-term storage item. So if you purchase it, it's something you would want to rotate. But it cooks up quickly. In fact, it doesn't require any heating. You can just add hot water. You can add cold water and let it sit, and it will reconstitute. And it's basically, I call it a convenience food. There's a mix that I make sometimes that is a breakfast food where you just pour like milk or orange juice or water on it the night before and stir in peanut butter and raisins and slivered almonds and honey, and you have a hearty, uncooked breakfast or lunch or snack or whatever your need is. But you aren't having to come up with some type of a cooking method. Very versatile. Okay, some of the other things, I mentioned the brown and white rice and the difference there. Then we have with oatmeal, we have steel cut oats, we have the old-fashioned oats, we have the quick oats, which are the smaller. And instead of the instant oat packs, you can make up your own seasoning packs with those. And they're a great thing to put in the thermos and put hot water over for hot oatmeal the next day. The seeds, sunflower seeds. Have you thought about that? Pumpkin seeds. Flax seed is another good nutritious thing to have. Now, I will tell you with flax seed, if you're grinding your own, don't use your regular grinder. Use like a coffee grinder because of the oils in it. And then I want to draw your attention to millet and quinoa, because quinoa is one of the things we hear about so much. And you know what? They look so much alike later when you have a chance to check out the samples that you almost cannot distinguish one from the other with the particular variety of millet I have here. Millet is it is very inexpensive. It is readily available. And in fact, in our country, until recently, it was most often used with bird seed. Other parts of the world have used it extensively. It doesn't have quite the versatility as wheat. It does not contain gluten, so breads don't rise. But you can make like a flatbread. You can make cereals out of them. There's a porridge in China. It's often eaten with beans and sweet potato and squash. In northern India, it's used to make flatbread. In Germany, eaten with honey and apples. Some interesting options. I think it's interesting if you've traveled or if you've just eating from different cultures. You learn how to use some of the things we take for granted. And you can use it in place of rice or quinoa. Protein content's about the same as wheat. It stores exceptionally well. The big advantage with millet, it's so easy to digest. And anybody who has issues with celiac disease, that kind of thing, tend to be able to tolerate the millet better. Now the other thing, the big rage now is quinoa. So I did some research on that. I have real mixed feelings about it. It's not a true cereal grain. It's actually most related to spinach, beets, and tumbleweeds. Okay, the thing you need to know with that, and Swiss chard, okay, all the same family. Any of you who, if you've ever had a kidney stone, know that the oxalates in those items, sometimes if you overeat, or you'll be warned against overeating those items because they tend to encourage the formation of kidney stones. Okay, so if you're a person that you've heard, oh, quinoa, high in protein, very nutritious, and it is, but that's what you store as your primary grain source, and you're in a situation where that becomes your primary grain source, got a problem. So be sure, variety. I would never ever focus on one grain exclusively of the others. The other thing with quinoa is it's expensive, and it has very specific growing conditions. The best is grown in South America. They are adapting some to be grown in America now. They've done, I know in parts of Colorado they grow it, and I've read some things about Minnesota where they're trying it. The tricky thing is at harvest time, it has to be dry. So the climate is real critical because if it gets moisture, it sprouts. So during the harvest season, it has to be really dry air. Well, this year would work here. But typical years, it would not work in Missouri. And there is a variance in the nutritional value depending on where it's grown. So once again, if it's available, you have some. It does have lots of advantages as far as nutritional value, and that's great. But just be aware that it's best not to make it your entire focus. And it's just not that available in the Midwest.
What is that called?
Quinoa. It's Quinoa. I know. Go figure. Pronunciations. Quinoa. If you hang out with the health food group, you'll see it. Because it is quite the rage now. Again, it has to be kept very dry during storage. Something else I'd like to draw your attention to, when you're looking at storage of any of these grains, and you read on, Prepare the Way's website is giving quite a bit of information on this, and I really appreciate it. But across the board on companies, as a general thing, be careful that you also read the cooking website information or the growing website information as well as the sellers, because there is a nationally known grain selling company that makes no distinction between white rice, brown rice, or quinoa or any of the others. It's basically the same thing. They say, stores up to 30 years, blah, blah, blah. Well, the thing with quinoa, if you read the cooking websites, they will say keep it refrigerated and use it within 6 months. So that's a huge distinction between that long-term storage thing. So you really need to become a wise consumer with this stuff. If in question, keep it cool, use it rapidly. And like I know on the Prepare the Way, I updated myself with it all last night with the website and where things were located, and notice the difference between the brown rice and the white rice. It mentions that brown rice does not store as well, and it needs to be rotated. And just keep those things in mind. Okay. I don't know if I mentioned much on the fats and oils or the milks. The fats and oils, the things that store the longest are, well, coconut oil is great. Avocado oil stores a long time. Olive oil is a wonderful oil, but it does not store a long time. And my understanding is it is freezable and freezes well. So you can try that if you have access to freezer. But for long term, you need other options too. So like when we put something in here like shortening powder, I think is in one of them, or sometimes is, that's not something I use at home. But when you are, the research says when you are in an emergency situation, you need more fats and you need more calories. So it depends on what you have access to. And if you need something that stores well for that purpose, then that is an option. Butter powder, of course, you can do too. It just doesn't last as long. So there are some distinctions you need to know between the different fats. I think coconut oil is just a wonderful option. It's pretty pricey, but if you can get it, it has multiple uses and long storage, long storability. The same thing when you're looking at the dairy products. I said earlier they don't store as long. You will always see non-fat milk, instant non-fat milk, or almost always. And the reason being because the fat in it's what makes it go rancid. Make sense? Okay, so like if you were doing the 1 year, you have approximately 12 buckets. You have about 45 number 10 cans. Okay? If you were doing it all in cans, again, I said it would be about that same amount of space. Now, the other thing, what I really advise people to do is do as much gardening as they can and combine what they can grow with what they store. I think that's the best, most practical long-term option. And even if you're limited in gardening space, anybody in the Midwest can grow kale or chard. I mean, some of those greens just grow and reseed and grow, and we'll be doing more gardening stuff tomorrow. But just so that you know that there are, just looking at that, that's how Grandma did it. I mean, you know, really, way back in the day, that's how they did it. We are so used to having big slabs of meat and all these fresh vegetables. We could use meat for seasoning, use more grains and beans, and then use for some of our fresh stuff, we can go back and use a lot of the greens, and then seasonally. Always eat seasonally. Better for nutrition, better for cost, and for long-term sustainability. Okay, making sense? All right, so review, I talked about you can sprout, you can grind. Oh, here's one little gem I want to highlight for you. I mentioned that freeze-dried is such an improvement, especially meats. You just didn't have options for meats hardly 15 or 20 years ago. And now you can get freeze-dried chicken, beef. Again, it's pricey, but it expands and it is a good source of protein. Up until then, most of the packaged foods you purchased had TVP in them. And this is, I'll read to you what's in it. I think this is it's either taco or bacon, TVP. It's soy flour, caramel color, yellow 6, red 3, partially hydrogenated soybean oil, salt, some natural flavoring, I can't say it, corn gluten, soy, wheat, and gluten protein. So, you know, that's your option. If you don't plan ahead, you could end up, and if you aren't knowledgeable, a lot of this, and you really don't want to be there. You really don't. You're better off doing your beans and rice or eating more creatively that way than you are loading up on the texture vegetable protein. One thing I also want to draw your attention to, and I don't have any for display for you, but when you are looking at the food, pre-packaged food meal products, like I mentioned, a beef stroganoff or a chicken tetrazzini or whatever, any of those kinds of things, there are huge differences between the companies and what you get. Not so much with just freeze-dried strawberries or apple chunks. Those are basically the same. But when you get into those packaged meals, huge differences. And one thing that Prepare the Way carries is it's the gourmet reserves labeling for that product. And I was so excited when I started reading those because I was fully expecting to see, you know, this kind of stuff. And it is not the case at all. They are very careful with their labeling. They're very honest with their labeling. And just some of the notes I did, I took on them. Some of their products are organically grown, and those are specifically labeled. But all the beef products are hormone-free. And they don't use any MSG. And I'm looking through here just because I really wanted to quote to you exactly from the catalog. They don't use any MSG. They don't use artificial flavorings, artificial colorings. They are, again, very accurate with what they even recommend on, like, some of the, when you read the calorie counts from some of those prepared things, sometimes those are padded because of the added sweeteners. And that is not the case with the gourmet reserves. And another thing they do is when they give their estimated shelf life, they will say 10 plus years or 8 to 10 years. And they specifically do that because they say they can't control how you're going to store it when you get it home. So it's just, I think, more accuracy in labeling than the 30-year plus. So really good products, huge variety of products. So what I do when I look at it, this is how I approach it at home. I have a lot of that kind of thing. And then I also have some cans of like the Gourmet Reserve, quick to fix items, okay? That's wise. And then things that I don't have access to. And we are on a farm. We have huge gardens, so lots of veggies, lots of fruits. But we don't have any animals. So I know that protein is one of those issues that we would have. So I've got, you know, anything I can think of to add protein to the diet. I've got to work on that. So think again about your situation and what that would mean. But I do all of that. And then I have some little packets of things, you know, freeze-dried, quick to carry things, and even meal bars. And then just normal food off the grocery shelf. I just stay stocked all the time. And again, my challenge has been with two of us, how different it is if you have, you know, a crowd. So you have to do some creative thinking with that. And I do have some quantity cooking ideas in a later session that I'm going to share with you, and some recipes and things too. But I'm hoping that in this time, as we finish up here and you're sorting through a lot of this and thinking questions, if you will apply to your situation, you know, what you're called to do, who you're preparing for. Is it you? Are you basically responsible for yourself? Are there others? Are there infants? Are there elderly people? Are there people with dietary needs? Because this food is a complicated thing. I mean, when we think about it, it's when we're hungry. And then we tend to want whatever is there and available. And it's just one of those deals that we don't tend to have to make long-range plans for. And that's what I'm challenging you to do, is make that long-range plans for these foods. Okay, just to give you a hint of what's to come too. I mentioned the gardening. We grew this corn this year, ground it into cornmeal, and made corn tortillas out of it. I had never done that before. You know, so even when, as much as I do this, I don't do it all the time at home. You know, it just takes time. It's a different thought process. But I really did it this time, and it was fun. And any of you who, if you'll write it on your calendar, you know, every week, try something new from stored foods. Because if we don't, we won't. You know, we just won't. Probably the most versatile stored food, honestly, though, for me, is oatmeal. Oatmeal, you can just do anything with. It goes in breads, you cook it plain, you can bake it, you can do it with a thermos. I don't know if any of you have eaten muesli before. It's just simply orange juice or milk you pour over the oatmeal the night before, let it soak, or it doesn't even have to be the night before, just long enough to let it soak, stir in whatever you have available. Homemade yogurt, perhaps, fruits, you can put nuts, you can put seeds, anything you want in it. High nutrition, no cooking required. See, that's the thing with the bulgur and with oatmeal for muesli. You don't have that long cooking time. In my next session, I'll show you pictures of it, but we've been trying something, the solar cooker, unsuccessfully. And I've read, you know, these things you read about, it's like, okay, I've read about a lot of stuff, and tried a lot of stuff, and it's like the hand grinders. You know, they'll say in their advertising, you know, it takes some strength to do it. Well, let me tell you, you know, like I said, it takes a lot of strength. So read between the lines on those, okay? Now, solar cookers will say, all right, let it cook all day. You don't have to worry about it burning. Well, here, not only do you not have to worry about burning, I did white rice and left it out a couple days ago from 10 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. And it still was not edible. Yeah. So it may be because of the time of year. It may be because of the latitude here. Other parts of the country, it may be different. And I'll be showing you some slides of our solar cooker. It's monstrous, or we would have brought it with us. And there may be some designs that are better than others. But my whole point with telling you that is practice. You know, I wouldn't want a crowd of people at my house hungry, waiting for that rice to cook. Seriously. And just work your plan. Plan it and then work it. Okay? So you be thinking of questions. I'll get to some more details, and we'll have samples, because you'll probably be getting hungry by then, in the next session. Does
So thank you very much.